Okay, let's talk about a name basically everyone knows, William Shakespeare. But we're not going to talk about the literary giant you learned about in high school English class. No, we're here to pull back the curtain and unravel the mysteries of the man behind the myth. So let's dive right in. On one hand, you've got the Shakespeare we think we know, right? The world's greatest playwright, the tragic poet. But then you start digging into the historical records, and a much stranger, way more complex person starts to emerge. A guy who was a shrewd real estate mogul, a suspected deer poacher, and, get this, the center of a 400-year-old identity crisis. And this whole mystery, it really kicks off early in his life, with this massive, totally unexplained gap right in his life story. I mean, just look at this timeline. In 1585, Shakespeare's in his hometown for the baptism of his twins. And then, poof, he's gone. For 7 solid years, there is a complete black hole. Nothing. He just vanishes from all historical records, only to pop up again in London in 1592, already making a name for himself in the theater scene. How does that happen? It's the question that has absolutely stumped biographers for centuries. How does a guy from a small town, with seemingly no connections, just suddenly become a literary star in London? Well, since history can't stand a vacuum, all kinds of legends rushed in to fill that gap. Some people suggested he was working as a quiet schoolteacher, but the story that really stuck is way more dramatic, that he got caught poaching deer on a rich guy's estate and had to flee to London to escape the law. It's a great story, and it just goes to show how myths get born when the facts just aren't there. But the mystery of his career is really just the beginning. The story gets so much more personal when you start looking for the riddles he hid in his most intimate works, the sonnets. We all know this line, right? It's pretty much the perfect thing to say to someone you love. It's considered the ultimate declaration of affection. But who exactly was Shakespeare writing it for? Well, the answer might just surprise you. That's right, the first 126 sonnets, which are just filled with these passionate declarations of love and immortal beauty, they weren't addressed to a woman, they were for a handsome, aristocratic young man. And it's how Shakespeare praised him that shows this whole other level of his genius. So, take the word complexion. When Shakespeare mentions the sun's gold complexion, he isn't just talking about a color. Back in his day, complexion also referred to your inner character. So with one word, he's saying the young man's beauty isn't just skin deep, it's his noble inner self that's shining through. And he does it again with the word untrimmed. You know, on the surface, it just means undecorated. But it was also a sailing term for a ship that didn't have its sails set, so it was just left adrift, helpless. With that one word, he captures this huge philosophical idea that all beauty is eventually powerless against the unstoppable force of time. But the fair youth wasn't his only inspiration. The later sonnets take this sharp, dark turn, describing a feverish, obsessive, and sometimes downright torturous affair with a woman known only as the Dark Lady. Her real identity is one of literature's biggest cold cases. The candidates range from a respected court musician all the way to a notorious brothel owner. It shows us a very real, very human Shakespeare, all tangled up in passion and desire. Now let's pivot from all that passion to something much more practical. Because when Shakespeare died, he didn't just leave behind his plays and poems, he left behind an absolute fortune. Yeah, forget that whole starving artist trope. This guy was loaded. By the time he died, he was one of the wealthiest men in his hometown. The inheritance he left for just one of his kids would be worth about £750,000 in today's money. He was a savvy businessman, and his super detailed will reveals one last fascinating puzzle. This one line has caused centuries of arguments. To his wife of over 30 years, Anne Hathaway, he leaves his second best bed. For years, people saw this as the ultimate insult, a final cold shoulder from beyond the grave. But was it really a slap in the face, or was there something else going on? Something that we're missing from our modern point of view? Well, this is where a little bit of historical context changes everything. In a wealthy Tudor house, the best bed was a status symbol. You kept it in the guest room to show off to visitors. The second best bed, though, that was the marital bed. It was the center of their private life together. So far from being an insult, it was probably an incredibly intimate and personal gift. But you know, solving one mystery in the will just uncovers a much bigger one. In this document, where Shakespeare literally accounts for every last silver spoon, something massive is completely missing. There's not a single mention of any books, any plays, or any manuscripts. Nothing. The entire collection of tools and finished products from his life's work, the very things that made him immortal, are just gone. How is that even possible? Well, this glaring omission is a huge piece of fuel for the whole Shakespeare authorship debate. For centuries, doubters have claimed the guy from Stratford was just a front man for a more educated nobleman who couldn't risk his reputation in the theater. Now, mainstream academics usually dismiss this, but some recent analysis points out there might be another reason the debate is silenced: money. There's a billion-dollar Shakespeare industry that has a huge financial stake in keeping the official story exactly as it is. So all of these threads, the lost years, the secret loves, that strange will, they all weave together into one final, enduring mystery. One that he might have actually designed himself. This is the verse that's carved on his tombstone. It's a direct warning to anyone who would even think about disturbing his grave. "Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones." It is chilling, it's direct, and it's so perfectly poetic. But this wasn't just him being dramatic. Grave robbing was a huge problem back then, and this curse was a really practical, powerful way to keep people away. And you know what? It worked. In over 400 years, with all the questions and controversies, no one has ever disturbed his remains. And that kind of brings us to the final thought here. The man who was the undisputed master of stories, of drama, of illusion. He left behind a life story with huge gaps, secret codes, and questions we still can't answer. So maybe his plays weren't his ultimate masterpiece after all. Maybe his greatest creation was the unsolvable, eternal mystery of William Shakespeare himself.